we're thinking about why you might even want to do responsive design, but what some of the elements and considerations you have to think about if you're going to start to go down this road. So I've got some slides here. It's going to be some questions I throw out there for you to almost think about and perhaps form your own answers as we get into it. So, but I'm actually going to start even further. So further back. As we think about responsive design is a web-based approach to presenting content across multiple devices. But even before that, you may have to think about starting with understanding a little bit about native versus mobile web. So I'm not going to get into too much detail here because we have a lot to cover. But when we talk about this with clients, the first thing we actually start to think about is, do you actually need a native app or do you need a mobile web approach to what you're trying to do? And the way we usually like to talk about it with clients is there's certain aspects about what you may need to do that lead you in the native way. So obviously things like, well, I need to be in the App Store. Well, obviously you need an app to do that. And I need device hardware features. I need access to things like the camera. Well, that's going to mean that you need to do something right now in the native space. It may change over time. Or I have a very function focus. There's very specific things I want to get out of this, and that may lead you into to the native side. But assuming you're not there, you may be down here, where a lot of people are, certainly a lot of our clients, and they're thinking, well, yeah, but I need broad device support. I have a high frequency of change with content. I have a very content-focused approach or need on the web. And I need some integration with third-party services or better discoverability through tools like Google. And that often leads you to saying, you know what, maybe I don't need a native application. I need something on the mobile web. So assuming you're down there, that's where responsive starts to kick in. So some key considerations that we like to walk clients through. I'll touch on a little bit more in each of these areas. Audience, content and functionality, cost, capabilities, and process. So audience. Responsive is a great kind of set of techniques and tools to really create the right experience for your users across multiple devices. But it's really critical to understand what your organization's goals are with respect to that audience, because that may actually not lead you in this direction, or really needs to form what needs to be presented on those smaller screens. I'll talk a little bit about process, but as you probably know, when you think about responsive, it's about scaling up and down that experience across multiple devices and experiences. And in doing so, you have to make a lot of decisions. So you really need to understand, what does your audience need to do and what's our goals around that? Because that's going to help you form what needs to take place in each of those viewports or experiences as we talk about it. And one of the ways that we try to think about that is understanding context. So context is something we deal with all the time, unconsciously. It's very critical in our daily lives. But when we think about it in mobile, it's actually, with the rise of the mobile technologies, whether it's native or mobile web, what we're seeing is there's a lot more, we have to kind of think more explicitly about it. So for instance, what's my user context? What's my level of engagement? What does that user need to do at that time? What's their environment? This is an easy one, right? Where are they? Are they on the bus? Are they at home? Are they walking down the street? That's really going to dictate a little bit, it should help you understand what you need to put there. And what's their device context? Am I sitting on the couch with my tablet? Or am I walking down the street with my phone trying to find something? What do you want your user to do at the time? What do they need to do, and where are they, and what's their frame of mind, and what's their level of engagement? Because that's really going to help you as an organization understand what needs to be presented there. So this is really important. There's a lot behind this. This can help you with app development, can help you with responsive design. Something we talk a lot about to our customers. And it's really, again, something that you really think about all the time. You just don't really think about it. And so with the mobile world, you kind of start to think about it more explicitly. Because we've all had those experiences where you need to find something, and I'm walking down the street, or I'm in a place where I don't have great connectivity, or I'm a bit stressed, and I need to find something, and I go to that website, and damn, it's tiny. I can't find anything, and I'm searching around, and then, oh boy, now I'm really upset, and now I don't want to deal with that, and that's a great example of where you need to think about where your users are. Because sometimes it means you don't need to do a tremendous amount of jumping through hoops for the mobile either. If your contexts line up and say, you know what, we really don't have a lot of users that are going to be using our stuff on a handset. Or if they do, we just want to present a few things, but we're not too worried about it, that can make it easier to do this work too. Or we know we have a lot of people who are going to sit at home at night while they're watching TV with their tablets, and they're going to browse our properties or really look at our web stuff. Well, that's really important to understand, because you may need to really focus there, because it's all about priorities. So content and functionality, again, this is a very important part of thinking about our consideration with responsive. Do you have an established content strategy in place? So that can mean a lot of things. It's a big word, strategy is a big word, but do you understand how you're going to publish your content, but do you have a strategy for what you need to put forward to users and how you're going to present that? one of the things that mobile's really putting a premium on is understanding how content needs to be used and reused. Because we've all gotten used to that desktop space, big space, a lot of broadband. We can bring a lot of power to the user. We got big monitors. We got big spaces. We can do a lot with that, right? So content pages can get long. They can get dense. There's a lot of things there. You can present different ads. You can present different links. Well, obviously, trying to do that on a phone is just not necessarily a great experience. So again, what's the strategy for how you create your content, how you think about it, and do you parse it out into the pieces that are really easily digestible by the user in that context, and also from a technical perspective, so that their experience is good and it's fast and it's responsive. And kind of building on that, does your publishing and management process need to change? Because everything's geared around creating pages on a desktop. And everything we do is thinking about pages in this kind of metaphor, but now we're not thinking about that anymore. Now we're thinking about pieces of content in different ways. And maybe our content's being syndicated, so other people are using it, and so that's got to be considered. And social media comes into play. Someone likes an article from your site, they get on Twitter, or they get on Facebook, they send that link out. Well, that user who gets that goes, oh, that's cool, I'll click through that. They're on their phone, and what do they get? They get the wrong experience. They go back to the desktop and they go, that sucks. I wanted to read that on the bus, but now I can't, so forget it. So thinking about all that stuff is really important. And lastly is interactivity. So a lot of responsive, when we talk about it, is something that definitely tailors well to a content-based environment, right? Because it's a little bit more flexible. But if what your users need to do, or what you need your users to do with your website is very interactive, well, some of the techniques we may talk about, you may need to think differently about. It doesn't mean you can't have a good mobile experience across different devices, but you may need to think about it differently. It may not be truly responsive in the technical sense. It may need to be approached differently. Again, thinking about the context of the user. So cost is a big reason why people talk about responsive. The big one being, if I've got one code base, ideally, this is going to save me money over time, which it should do. It doesn't mean you can't have an MStar site or a mobile site and not be successful with that. But ideally, I've got lower costs. I've got one code base. I've got one system. I can maintain that. It's easier. However, you do need to be aware, sometimes there's higher development costs up front. Could be increased complexity and scope. We'll talk a little bit about process, but think about the process you go through. You're now designing for different experiences. We're very used to designing for one experience. It's that desktop experience. Now we're designing for multiple experiences. Now we're thinking about the phone. We're thinking about the iPad. We maybe think about the television, about somebody sitting and browsing a website on the TV. So there is a little bit of increased complexity in thinking about those interactions and how that comes forward and what the users need to do. So you need to be aware of that if you're thinking about it from your organizational perspective. Don't underestimate. Yes, there's lower costs over time, but as you're just getting into it, it could be a little more complex to think about because it may not be something you're dealing with now. So there's just an extra consideration. So responsive, process is key here. So we've done responsive a couple different ways. First time we did responsive, we did it backwards for a client. We actually did all the desktop first, and then said, hey, wouldn't it be great if this all worked on mobile? So then we started thinking about how it's going to work on the mobile devices, and we actually went backwards. It worked, kind of, bit of a crowbar, and but it was an interesting process to go through because we thought, wow, this is really hard to think about that way. Because we started with the big picture and we were really comfortable with everything we could do there. Because that's the world we all live in and everybody's comfortable with and our clients are comfortable with. And then we had to go smaller and it was harder because then it's like, well, what do they want to do? I don't know. We hadn't thought about it that way. And I hadn't thought about what they need to do on an iPad. I hadn't thought about that user on a handset walking down the street. Do we care? I don't know. Do we care about it? I don't know. So this is really important. We call it about mobile first. So really the way to do responsive ideally is to actually start with the smallest device and work up. So think about that experience. What do I need users to do when they take this out and they go to my website? What is the thing that needs to happen? Because this will make you think about priorities. So are you ready to work from the smallest viewport out? Now, ironically enough, when we do this with clients, when we talk about the design side, we still present designs usually from the big down. Because that's what you're still kind of attuned to that. Let me see what the website looks like on the desktop. That's what the stakeholders want to see. Let me see that picture of what it's going to be. And then we kind of say, okay, that's great, and here's what it's going to be on the iPad, and here's how it's going to look on the phone. But we start the process actually in reverse. we start by saying, what is that experience at a very stripped down level on the phone? Because that's where you make your priorities. That's where all the other stuff comes into play. What's that context? What do I want users to do? Because everything can't fit on this screen neatly, and the interactions don't always work very well. Because you have to start folding things down, you have to start making real decisions. The big picture allowed us to put lots of stuff up there, right? We have these websites with tons of stuff, all the navigation, content, boxes, boom, boom, great. It doesn't fold down very well. So that's where it really is about context and priority. What do I need users to do? So think about, can you work that way? And it's not that you can't, it's just, do you work that way now? And what might you need to do to think differently to do that? So things like, how do I capture requirements effectively for that? A lot of us over time have gotten used to capturing requirements and thinking about it all within that interaction that we're going to have on the desktop. So we'll work with clients sometimes and we'll look through their requirements. George and I worked with some big insurer out in the Midwest this summer. They had a great SDLC, really detailed. They had all the right stuff checked off. But when you started to look more closely at what they were doing, they had become so attuned to thinking about the desktop that in their requirements, they started building in all the interaction design in that document. Which meant if you actually tried to take that and make something different to work on the iPad or the iPhone or whatever, it wouldn't work. Because everything was tuned up to the desktop. So we had to kind of work with them to break all that stuff back apart and say, what are your requirements? What do you need to do? Well, let's do the interaction design later. Let's really think about the basis. Let's really understand what you need to do. And then we'll start to design from the smallest point up and think about it that way, which should really help you then create the right experience. And then capabilities. So responsive design to be successful, you'll need some sort of expertise in web front-end technology. So you probably all know that. It's an HTML5 based world, CSS3, JavaScript. I mean, these are the tools of the trade when you get into responsive. Again, interactivity aside, that may be a different thing, but this has put a premium on having real expertise in some of these areas because it matters. It matters for a lot of reasons, mostly for testing, but that user interaction design is a required skill. We've got a lot more patterns to consider. So how do you go about doing that? Because the interaction pattern of my thumb on this and how I do this, how you all probably use that, is different than when I use a mouse and how I'm going to use that. The swiping, the gestures, everything's different. So how do you think about it? Still a lot of the same places you're getting to, but you really have to think about that user interaction design. And so that becomes more of a required skill. Start to understand your users, what they're doing in those environments and how they're going to use them. And lastly, testing. So don't underestimate testing needs, devices, and updated approach. So again, this is one of those areas where over time we've gotten used to testing, and any of us who've done this for any length of time can have plenty of horror stories about browser testing, right? Across my
What's that, Justin? I think of my throat.
Just even in the desktop world, right? Yeah, our friends at Microsoft, that whole thing. It's very, you can underestimate the complexity around chasing down those issues across browsers. Well, okay, now we've added tablets. Now we've added devices. And of course, then we're in the Android world. God knows how many devices we've added and OSs and flavors and this and that and everything.
I have a picture of that.
I'm sure. And it's ugly. So when we work with clients, we try to get them to define that because there's no way you're covering all this, but these testing needs and how you're going to do that, you've got to think about. So there's kind of the ways that we try to do that is you can use a mix of approaches. You could go out and get a ton of devices, which some people still do. Definitely is starting to happen. You see these articles, you're looking at these testing labs, you have all different types of devices. And you could do that. You can have relationships with other vendors. Now there's new vendors coming up that are presenting the ability to have access to multiple devices to do this kind of testing. There's a variety of ways that's starting to happen, and I think with the problem that it presents, that means someone's going to, or organizations are starting to fill that void and come up with services. But don't underestimate when you're thinking about your planning, the time it can take, some of the complexity to sit and chase down some issues. So we did a responsive video site earlier this year. It's up for a MyTix award this year. We spent a lot of time chasing down little niggling Android issues. Worked great on the iOS, but boy, the scrolling patterns on Android just didn't work very well. And the way it would flip the videos and some other things. Should have worked well, it was documented to work well, didn't work well. So again, don't underestimate some of that time to think about some of this stuff. I don't mean to paint a bleak picture, it's all doable, but when you're thinking about it, you're planning it, the whole thing, remember that it's not just that, if you thought the browser world, the desktop world had one set of challenges, we've now added some of that to that. It all works, but you just got to make sure you're spending that time and thinking about it. And again, it comes down to choices. You can't cover everything. Just like nowadays, you're probably telling your stakeholders, you know what, IE6, sorry. I mean, we're not doing that anymore. But you can't, so you have to start thinking about that in terms of Android even. Well, there's only certain ways we can handle it. At some point, you just can't deal with it. But you got to remember to think about some of the testing implications because it does come up. So that's it.